Thanks, Brian. That was very informative and very concise for the amount of information that's being presented. I'm really excited about hearing from the next person, who's Julie Stitler with Homeward Inc. She's going to talk to us about affordable housing and incorporating solar into those buildings. I think this is an area that the Montana Energy Office is continuing to try and crack this nut to the extent they possibly can. And the fact that they've been doing such a great job with it here in Montana is a testament to them. I'm very eager to hear what she has to say. So without further wasting of time, I'll turn it over to Julie. Okay. And because I continually forget this, she's the housing project manager for Homeward.
Okay, I'll try to be concise also, but it's not something that I'm really known for, so I'm just preparing you for that. Just to briefly let you see what our mission statement is. One of the key elements of our mission statement is that we use sustainable methods. That's why we try to do solar on every project that we do. We are a community housing development organization, which is a HUD thing and related to different types of HUD funding. But we're also a nonprofit. We don't just develop homes, we also provide programs for people to try to help them find their way into more financial stability with housing counseling and first-time homebuyer education and financial literacy. And something that people don't know, that have heard of us, they think of us, oh, you're a Missoula nonprofit, which is sort of like saying, oh, you're one of a gazillion people. But because Missoula has so many nonprofits, but we actually work all across the state of Montana. So we have properties in 13 different communities right now in Montana, and we're going into 2 more communities that we've never had a project in before. So we definitely try to serve throughout the state. But to get to why we're really here, I'm going to run through our projects that have solar on them. Right now we have 24 rental developments in Montana, and of those 13 have solar arrays on them, or solar hot water, or both. Gold Dust in Missoula is the first one we did. We couldn't include the solar with the construction because we couldn't find a funding source for it. We got a grant afterwards, got it installed afterwards. And at that time, in 2003, the architects thought solar looked gross. And this is the same architect who did the parking garage, so you can see how far they've come. In that lower picture, you can see that we finally were able to tilt those solar panels up so we could actually get a little more benefit from them. But originally they were installed flat, so you couldn't see them from the street. The Acme in Billings is our next project. Wanted to point out that even though it can be challenging, you can get historic property and affordable and solar all together on one property. It can be very challenging to include solar on a historic property because it doesn't look very historic, but you know, as long as you can't see it from the street, you're good to go. And we got quite a nice little array here on the Acme, and you can see how big this array is and how small the kilowatt rating is for that system. And as we go along, the arrays stay about the same size, but the kilowatts that they're generating goes up. So it's been a fascinating history for us. I've only been there 10 years, but so these first few projects are before my time. Orchard Gardens has both hot water and solar hot water and a PV system, and it also is part of a larger development. We have, a larger development. We have a farm there, a community farm that's run by Garden City Harvest. So it's, you know, all part of that sustainability and trying to be reducing your carbon footprint and provide healthier alternatives for people. And the hot water system is, there's just one hot water system on the main building, and that works for 20 homes. Equinox was the first project I worked on at Homeward, and It's, was the first project where we actually included the solar in the construction budget. We had it in there. It wasn't, maybe we can make this work. It wasn't, maybe if we'll find a grant. It was, we're gonna do this, we're including it, and we're counting on it because we're promising it to the investor partner. So we had to do it. We had to figure out a way to do it. Solstice, which is right next to Equinox, you can see both of them there at the bottom, in 2011. Same thing, we included that right from the very beginning. And I think it was really interesting to hear him talk about designing with intent, because we often find that our solar systems are kind of added on afterwards. Sometimes you have no choice. This is Rainbow House in Great Falls. We did this project with a for-profit partner out of Seattle, and obviously this building wasn't existing because well, you can see it's a little dated, but adding it to an existing building really changes the operations of that building. It really reduces the operating cost, and it's a great way to go. Silverbow, another rehab project in Butte. And it was funny because this had a very new roof, but our partner was very worried about putting that system on the existing roof. It was about 10 years old. So, you know, we knew it was going to be replaced in another 10 years or so, and having all those panels up there and having to remove, so we just re-roofed the southern half of the building so that we could make sure that roof underneath would last as long as the panels, or almost as long. Hillview in Haber, another project that's an ACK rehab, has both hot water and PVs. I don't know how many PV systems it had because it changed. We initially had a lower number, we found some more funding, the number went up. The buildings on that have hot water heat, so that having the hot water solar really helped their heating bills for the residents. This is another acquisition rehab in Malta. You can see we didn't have an ideal orientation on any of the buildings there, so we have these kind of wonky standoffs on the sloped roof, trying to get that up there to get a little bit of solar. Serapenis Village in Great Falls, 2015. We thought we were going to be able to put this on the roof, and actually that you wouldn't even be able to see it from the street, but the roof structure was overstressed already because, you know, it was designed 50 years ago. So we ended up with the ground mounted array, and it was the first one we've done that was on the ground and not on the building. Now it has a fence around it because that's a requirement, but you can't see it because the fence is there, so. And then Larkspur Commons in Billings, that's 136 homes, but we had 16 hot water systems, so there's 8 buildings, 2 hot water systems per building, and then a pretty small PV array. There was a lot of gas-fired water heaters and gas heat in that building. Sweetgrass Commons, solar was a dual purpose here. We wanted to be able to provide shading for that southern patio because it's hot. It's really hot. This whole area is just now being redeveloped, so there's not a lot of trees. It's kind of a warm area of Missoula, the Garden City. And so this is a great solution for providing solar on the property and yet still providing a benefit to the residents that are using the property. And the other thing that it did was we had the patio underneath had this horrible place where it would pond and then freeze in the winter. And the solar array took care of that. I didn't have to rip out any concrete or drill holes into the retaining wall because this thing just keeps the snow right off of that, so it's not a problem. And then our last one, which I don't actually have any pictures of the solar array installed, was Little John and Big Fort. Again, another acquisition rehab. We have 2 more projects. We have another historic project that we're doing in Livingston, and then another large project like the Bozeman project over in Billings, and both of those will have solar as well. So 13 projects, 8 communities, 309 kilowatts, 374 homes provided that are supported by solar, at least partially. Why do we do it? You know, I think we've already determined that payback is not why we do it. We know that it's not going to pay back in a way that is something that is meaningful to either us or our investors or to the property. But it does reduce maintenance costs, or not maintenance costs, operations costs. And the increase in maintenance, because you've got another thing that you have to take care of, it definitely is still a benefit to the project. The reduction in the operations cost, the utility bills, is more than the extra maintenance that you have to spend. In fact, the thing that we have the most trouble with on all of our systems is the monitoring systems. It's not the solar array, it's not the inverter, it's not any of the electrical stuff that you think would go wrong. It's the silly little modem that's supposed to be uploading your monitoring information to the website so that you can go and see how many kilowatts you're generating. And then, of course, we want to do the right thing. We're trying to reduce our carbon footprint. So the challenges that we find is that when you have multiple buildings, multiple net meters, if you have multiple meters, if each building has a meter, then you've got multiple net meters. Northwestern Energy is not super thrilled to work with us on that because we like to put in separate meters for each apartment because that helps people. For one thing, they can control their utility costs. They're not just being assigned a utility cost that some government agency figured was how much the average renter was going to spend on utilities in a 2-bedroom home. If they want to keep their heat low, they can pay less in their utilities. And it also prevents people from wasting energy. Where we don't have individual meters, people will open the window in the winter and turn the heat up to get a little fresh air in, instead of something that might be more energy efficient, like turning on the bathroom fan. We can't pass the savings on directly to the residents because if there's individual meters, we can't sub-meter in this state. We can't put in sub-meters and then charge the residents their utility costs based on the sub-meters. It's not allowed. So we don't, the overall project gets a benefit, which is a benefit indirectly to the residents because they are living in a stable project that is financially feasible, but they don't see the savings on their bills. And that would be a really nice thing if we could figure out how to do that. As I said, maintenance isn't a big deal, but the monitoring and the maintenance of the monitoring systems is kind of a pain, especially if you don't have somebody on your staff or your property management staff who's kind of into that geeky sort of stuff. And we have a lot of geeks on our staff because, we're developers, and architects and engineers, but we don't have a lot of capacity to spend, checking each month, seeing if all the different modules are working, or if there's one module that's not recording and why it's not recording. And then, of course, we have dwindling funding sources, despite the fact that we think this is the direction that the entire world should be going towards alternative energy sources. Funding sources are drying up. For a lot of the early projects, the majority, 50% or more of the solar cost was funded by private foundation grants. There are no private foundation grants at this time that we know of to fund alternative energy. And of course, there are sometimes they show up and they just are for 1 year or for 2 years. But right now, today, there's nothing out there from a private foundation specifically targeted to alternative energy or renewable energy. So what do we use? Our biggest source of funding is investment tax credits, the solar tax credits that we've all heard about, and which were negatively impacted by the recent changes in the tax credit tax law with the current administration. And I think we think that was a mistake, that was the wrong direction to go, because we should be continuing to get people to put these systems on their projects. But it's still there. We did keep that in place, so it's still there. So definitely something to take care of or take advantage of, and it works really well with other tax credits. So if we're developing a project with the low-income housing tax credit, we already have an investor on board for millions of dollars. They're going to pick up those investment tax credits for $20,000 or $60,000 or whatever, and it makes a huge difference because it pays for a significant portion of the solar system. Northwestern Energy has, for people who are in public buildings, it acts like a grant, but it's really an incentive program. And they will fund up to, well, the last time we did it on Cedarview in Malta, it was up to 25% of the cost of the system, which if you can get 20% or 30%, well, not anymore, 26% covered by your investment tax credit and 25% covered by Northwestern Energy, if you happen to be in their service area, you can see that that's really bringing that cost more into an accessible location. Private foundations, like I said, we don't know of any right now, but we keep our eyes open, we keep looking, and there are some that you could stretch. We can certainly use an affordable housing program grant to help fund construction, so that's included with construction, the solar, so it technically is used, it's just not targeted towards that. One of the things that we've been talking about doing now that we've got 13 systems, is we take the savings in operations from each of those projects and we combine that so that we're taking the savings from 13 projects and we create a revolving loan fund for the next project so that we are using our assets to help develop future projects and create more solar systems, which will then add to that revolving loan fund with their savings. And then HUD has some grants that they come out with every once in a while for projects that are subsidized. So if you have a Section 8 project or some other HUD subsidy or even RD subsidy, you could potentially tap into some HUD funding sources. We don't have very many projects that are subsidized. So what's next? We would encourage everybody to keep installing solar. It's the way to go. We've even started pulling back from using gas, which is a lower operations cost and a lower cost to the residents, because that's fossil fuels. You can't, I mean, I'm never going to be able to put an array on there to charge up my solar furnace or my gas furnace, right? It's got to be, so we've started doing more all electric projects with the hope that eventually all of our electricity will be coming from renewable sources. Convince or incentivize Northwestern Energy and other Montana energy providers to be more collaborative in this process. They're very supportive of workshops, things like that, but their practices and policies make it hard to implement these systems. I can't find out how much energy my residents are using in each of their apartments. I don't want to know if they're paying their bills. I don't want to know, but I want to know how I can benefit them, and I can't figure that out. I can reduce their utility allowance if I knew that they were using less energy than what HUD assumes they're going to be using. Support PACE financing programs. I think there's one coming up in the state pretty soon for a vote, or at least to be discussed. And PACE is a well, you can look it up on Wikipedia, but basically you're using a bond or a private investor to create a loan fund for people to do energy improvements or renewable energy, and then that loan is paid back over 5 to 25 years from your taxes. So it's not, it's like an assessment that gets put on your property. And that's something that 27 or others, something like that, other states have access to that. We don't have that here in Montana. And then, you know, keep letting our legislators know this is important to us. yes, this state has a lot of fossil fuel industry, but it also has a lot of renewable energy industry, and that's just as important to support and, healthier for everybody. And then here's what, little goofy slide that they make me put in because it's part of the template. And, marketing and, branding, that's what they call it. And we'll end with the lovely mission. Any questions? I tried to go as fast as I could. And I already talked pretty fast, so. I do have, if you're interested, there's some annual reports on the back table and some carpenter's pencils, and then copies of the presentation if you wanted to read more about it.